Dr. Hoff took his dissertation and built an amazing business. So he's here to tell you all about the hope of the end after the dissertation. So, Dr. Hoff,
Okay, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Christine. I hope everyone's doing well. And yes, as Dr. Christine was just saying, I'm going to just try to briefly go through here real quick and just tell you about a little bit about what I did with my dissertation study, as Dr. Christine was mentioning, and turning it into, so to speak, my own business model. So just tell you a little bit about myself, first of all. Before I came to GCU and graduated my doctoral degree, I was known as Taryn, aka the Traveling Trainer. This is my brand. I'm a traveling personal trainer. I've had my own business now for about 14 years. And so part of my motivation to go to school and go to postgraduate studies was specifically to study performance psychology. And that was what my emphasis was as I obtained my PhD in general psychology with the emphasis in performance psychology. And the title of my study was a qualitative descriptive research study called The Self-Determination of Millennials and the Realization of Their Personal Training Goals. I had the fortunate luck to have Dr. Mall as my chair. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our committee team here in a second, but I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot summary of the overview of what my dissertation was. And basically what it was trying to figure out kind of the how. The phenomena was, how do millennials get motivated and reach their personal training goals? And in that, I used Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which comprises of the three: autonomy, competence, and relatedness, which I strongly feel is very fundamental in the whole concept of personal fitness training. Because as we know, a lot of it is, learning the independence and the autonomy from personal training in a synergistic way from the trainer to the client and so forth. Learning and developing the mastery and the competence, again, from those fundamental skills from the trainer to his or her client. And finally, what I argue to be most important is the relatedness, the relationship between the trainer and the client. I'll touch more on that here momentarily when I discuss what we did with the dissertation. A key finding from the study was just what I found as my aha moment from my study was developing the type of synergy that's involved between personal trainers and their clients to basically achieve their goals. And I'll tell you a little bit about that when we talk about what the summary table was here in a few slides. But first, Dr. Mall and I developed what you see here is the problem space in my study. So basically what, as you see, you follow this illustration from left to right, you have what has been discovered. And on each of those lines, you can see that those were kind of what was forming and creating this study in terms of how do we address what has been discovered and what still needs to be understood. When you take those two pictures together and overlap them, we have what's called the problem space, or formerly known as the gap, kind of what's in the literature that still needs to be presented. And that was important to figure out the next steps, because as the dissertation evolved, we developed in chapter 2 of the review of the literature what's known as the synthesis to define the direction of the need, or that problem space, so to speak. So you can see in this illustration on the very left, this illustration is just kind of what are the perspectives bounding this study. And so, for example, you can walk around the outside of the seven shaped diagram and just see that you have to talk about personal training and millennials and all the other variables that comprise this study. And then the illustration on the right, Dr. Ahmad just touched on this a few minutes ago, and I'm not going to talk about the thematic analysis. I thought he did a wonderful job of breaking that down, but that's what we used in this case with my qualitative descriptive study was taking those codes that you see on the left when the millennials were answering in their self interviews, and they were producing what became to be the themes, as you see the Venn diagram of what those personal training goals are. So we took autonomy, competence, relatedness, kind of overlapped them here and tried to figure out what those themes were developed from the codes that they were providing us. This is a kind of the table that I was referring to earlier of that key that Dr. Mall and myself kind of developed here along with our committee. So what we did here, as you can see in this table, was just shaping this table for both personal trainers and clients to take a look at and see what are the factors for success when they're working together. So for example, you have what's called action items here, and you have them both from the perspective of the personal trainer as well as the client. And when you go through these different themes here, you can see that they are aligned with autonomy, confidence, and relatedness respectively. And I wanted to give credit to my committee team upon finishing up the dissertation. Dr. Mall, Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Smith were very gracious in helping me write and submit basically an article to be published in the Journal of Performance Psychology. Took about a year, but they finally got it published, and it's available both as a hard copy and online. I was very pleased with it. It's about 20 pages in length, and it was kind of the core kind of results and summary, if you will, with conclusions and discussion of what my study was. And as you can see, I mentioned this a few moments ago, I talked about the relatedness factors. In my argument, I strongly feel that this could be researched a little bit further in other studies and see how important that relatedness component is versus the autonomy and confidence when it comes to a qualitative study such as this. Just talking now, kind of shaping into what the website of my business model is. This is kind of just the front page of the website. You go to my website page, and you can just see I've incorporated kind of what the transformation, kind of a metamorphosis, if you will, of where I was when I was the traveling trainer, and then going to postgraduate school with GCU, finishing my degree, and then ultimately also becoming both a chair here with GCU as well as a content expert. So right now, as of now, I have about 6 learners that I currently chair with GCU, and I'm about on 5 or 6 other committees as a content expert as we speak. And as far as just kind of helping the learners that are on the call right now, I'm just going to encourage them not to give up. And when they're working on their dissertation, I think it's so important to really focus on how this works in the practical setting. And what I mean by that, in my case, in personal training, it's all client oriented, and it's really the service and the value of the client, what they see both long term, but also building that trust worthiness with you, and that integrity and that honesty that they look for in their personal trainers. Because ultimately, again, as I mentioned, that relatedness factor is so important. But again, I think that translates to any type of business you could think of, whether it's restaurant, retail, you name it, and even in academia. You want your customers, your clients, or your patients, or what have you, to really believe in what they're purchasing, whether it's a product or service. In my case, it's the personal training services. And I strongly believe that's what leads to a bigger motivation and a better practice. Some of the challenges that that I learned along the way, including weaknesses and limitations, kind of focus on some of this here in terms of, again, I'll say it again, I encourage learners to just, whatever your dissertation study is, think about why you're doing it, the passion of it. I know that you've all been probably at this point up to residencies, and you've talked to different people counseling you on this, but really you want to think about post, when you draw past that finish line, like Dr. Ahmad has, like, what's the next step? Well, how is this going to help me in my business? What am I going to do with it? And again, in my case, what I did was basically just stood out. My goal was, and anybody that knows, personal training is a very heavily saturated market, and it's very competitive. And I strongly believe that doing something like this is basically really had me kind of stand out in terms of being a unique, different type of personal trainer. So my final advice here, just to wrap things up and to summarize it all, is just really focus on those action items that I talked about. In my case, those were the action items of being very proactive in terms of both personal trainers and clients, because my goal is to share that action table that I developed along with Dr. Mall, and just give that to other personal trainers, and maybe even sell it in some form. I'm thinking in terms of books or future articles and such. And then again, as I mentioned, just kind of doing, and this worked for me, I think this will work for others as well, but really think about how that works in the real world. How does this work applicable and into your own business? And, how can you obtain some of the different types of relationships and results that you're transforming, your research study in. So that's why I kind of think of it as like a living document, because it's constantly evolving. And let's face it, I'm sure that my business will continue to evolve as I go along. So I started the study by introducing myself as Karen, the traveling trainer. And now, as I stand before you, as I mentioned, I'm proudly known as the prodigy of sports psychology. And that officially wraps up my presentation.
It's awesome. Let's see if there's
Thank
any
you.
little questions.
Nice.
Sorry if I went through that a little quickly, but just wanted to make sure we got through it.
There were no questions, Dr. Quaid, only congratulatory comments.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.